Dog. All right, guys, the moment you've been waiting for. The wonderful experience. We've got Dean from Razbury Games. That's right, the dev, the brains behind the whole operation. We actually got the opportunity down at PAX South to try out his game, to try out the team's game in a wonderful experience. And it was a lot of fun. It feels a lot like, you know, a bit like Slay the Spire, like Monster Train, a lot of that card-driven style combat. And it's a lot of fun. It kind of even has like a similarity to that feel of Rust, which is a lot of fun. Flander Jam, Night Mother, AOD, thank you so much for those follows. Greatly appreciate it. And it's a blast. And so we reached out in the process of trying to not only learn more about the game, but play the game to really, one, enjoy it, and then two, stream it. And then I was like, you know what? Maybe, just maybe, we'll have the luxury to pull them in. No, I still have a logo. I just got that from DAP. I mean, we can talk if there's something going on. Yeah, he just got me a logo like last night. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, okay. We're good. We're good. Anyways, sorry. Don't mean to derail. So we've got Dean here. Dean here from Razbury Games, and we had the wonderful opportunity to play from Rust while we were there. No, it's all right. We're good. We had the opportunity to play from Rust while we were down there, and then I got the opportunity to play in the alpha, which they're currently doing today. They're going to be doing another rebroadcast of the alpha later, and then bringing people in. So theoretically, if you guys were interested in getting involved in that title, it'd be a wonderful opportunity. Just saying, not saying. We'll talk to him about it. You know, maybe we can get that out there. But more importantly, without further ado, I would love to find out more about game development, game design, what it takes to really drive an experience, from storytelling to artistic motive to everything that makes, breaks, and gets involved in a game that helps us live these experiences and build these relationships and immersion, to help us really understand not only who we are, who we want to be, who we don't want to be. And games allow us to express ourselves, relax, just have fun, and kick back. So let's bring them on. Let's bring on Dan. Sorry, Dean. I apologize. I'm getting my names mixed up. Dean, for a wonderful time. How's your day going? It's going extremely well. Dear Sir Dean, how are you? Welcome. Happy to have you. You should be good to go, Dean. Oh, I know what's causing the problem. That would help. I'm a professional. He can hear me. I'm sorry. I'm a professional, I swear. Dean, how are you?
I'm good. good. Thanks so much for inviting me to this.
No, it's our pleasure. By all means, it's our pleasure.
And I hope this is your first day on Twitch, right?
Yeah. Yep. No, it's
like going well for you.
It's going extremely well. We're having a blast. It's been definitely a challenge. It's different. There are some things that I'm still gonna have to learn, bots and all that. It's new. It's definitely new, uncharted territory, but it's exciting. We have a lot of the community that's continued to follow up and be there along with us and continue to support that journey. So, hey.
I'm glad,
absolutely
glad that people are coming in. I can also see Antoine's comment. I can move my mic a little bit closer too.
We got it. All right, cool. Yeah, that's looking good. Good volumes. Good volumes. Awesome. So yeah, I'm excited to hear about Razbury, to hear about what it takes to put into a game. I've been looking forward to always getting in touch with a developer to really get an idea of that. Now I know that we kind of chatted a little bit. I went to school at Full Sail, and so I'm familiar with the process, at least to a degree, right? But a lot of other people they don't know, like, and I'm sure that you see it a lot in the industry, that like people are like, oh, why is my game delayed? What's going on? Like, oh, this sucks and that sucks and blah, 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 blah. And I think that there's a lack of understanding there, which I really think it's so great as to the opportunity to have someone come on who works in the industry, who works as a dev, and talks about, not only those challenges, but I guess the standpoint of the difference between publishing and self-development and indie dev and all of that. So I've been incredibly excited for this opportunity to get someone as fantastic as yourself in awesome. A wonderful game. So tell us about yourself.
Thank you. Yeah. So, like you introduced, my name's Dean. I am the owner of a small studio here in New York City called Razbury Games. I started on this journey, I guess, in earnest in 2016. Before that, I was actually an attorney practicing law here, so this was a pretty substantial shift for me. Released my first game, Vidar, maybe 2017, and then have started working on a new game called From Rust, which is a multiplayer co-op collectible card game kind of thing going on. It's been fun. It's been kind of a crazy journey to be able to touch a lot of different facets of indie development in particular. I'm not somebody who particularly knows a lot about the AAA studios besides friends that I have at those places, but it's I think everyone has to wear so many different hats when we're doing indie game development, and that's kind of fun. I think it's more fun than being pigeonholed as just one specific person at a major game studio who's like only responsible for doing the 3D item assets, and that's it, and that's what you're going to be doing for the next 2 years on this game. It's nice to really have to think about everything from a global perspective for the game, from the development to how the art's going to be integrated, to the narrative stuff, and then of course all of the business side, not just on the development side. So I touch a lot of it.
So in being, it sounds like a much smaller studio. How big exactly is Razbury Games in terms of heads?
Yeah, so full-time it's literally just me. So I partner with a lot of other contractors on an as-needed basis. So from Rust, I think our team is maybe up to maybe 7 or so that kind of come and go as necessary, and that tends to be pretty traditional, like in an indie space where there will only be a handful of core team members. If you think about certain aspects of games like the music and sound design, right? Especially from an indie perspective, like the amount of time that has to go into the rest of the game is 100 times more than has to go into composition, music generation, music production, sound effects, those things. So typically your audio person or audio people will only be brought on sparingly, for a handful of hours at a time when they're necessary. So those kinds of, especially that flexibility is way more necessary in indie because we're working on such a razor thin budget that we can't just have an audio guy on staff all the time who's not going to be really doing a lot of stuff. So I tend to partner with different people on projects as necessary. It also gives me the flexibility to. My last game was very pixel art driven. This one is comic books in terms of art style, and so it helps to be able to find different artists where that's their skill set, and it just makes it a little bit nicer also to be able to work with new friendly faces. Yeah.
Awesome. So like I know you had kind of talked about it a little bit about like, you know, budgets being razor thin. And so, you know, we're so used to this industry where especially on the back end, I know a lot of people don't even think about it or know about it wholeheartedly, but you know, you've got a publisher who's essentially fronting the bills, right? You know, they're paying most of that effort in order to deliver on a time frame or you know, give the development team the right assets, but you know, it's part of the contract. Like, we'll give you X amount of dollars in order to help you to pay for staffing, to help you to pay for whatever. But then there are terms that go along with that. And so, you know, you have to deliver upon a time frame. You have to have this genre or, you know, whatever it is in order to get that to work in that business deal. And so, you know, when you're talking about a budget, being an indie developer, like how do you guys find, since you're not obviously selling the game until it's finished, how do you guys find, you know, raising the money? Do you guys do like crowdsourcing? Like I know obviously that's been a big thing on Kickstarter. You know, Pillars of Eternity took off because of that. So when you're talking about these business opportunities to, you know, like do seeding, you know, like crowd seeding, you know, funding, things like that, I think that there's a lot of options that are available to an independent developer that may have not been available, let's say 10 years ago, or maybe even a little bit more than that, but you know, that have just really opened up the industry to see not only fantastically driven games with a smaller studio, but that have a clear sense of direction, that aren't inhibited by a publisher's demands, et cetera, et cetera. So like, how does Razbury find that funding?
Yeah, so to directly answer your question, crowdsourcing and Kickstarter specifically. So we did a Kickstarter for the last game. We'll almost certainly do one for this game as well. And it's a path that has brought us, you know, some decent success, in part because at an indie level, one of the main concerns, and especially now for this current game, which is an indie multiplayer game, right, where we're going to have live servers and all that stuff, it's almost more important to have community in place. The funding is really important, but it's just up there with it is the idea of having a lot of people who are excited about the game at launch. Unlike, say, you know, a AAA model or even a III model, where there's going to be that baked-in community. For a lot of us, like unknowns, or for games that are kind of struggling to get traction, it's purely a word of mouth evangelist kind of mentality. I talk with a lot of indie developers who continue to say, for example, you can throw, you know, as much money as you want at Facebook ads, or, you know, hiring somebody to do PR, all that kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, none of that stuff matters. And the only thing that really drives sales for us remains word of mouth. To that end, a Kickstarter is a really good tool, or any kind of crowdfunding is a really good tool for being able to build up that community early, right? It's a place where you can concentrate those people. Discord has started to serve us for that as well, but you don't want to be in too many different places at once, because then, you know, you're spreading your resources thin to try to say, okay, you know, this we're trying to manage this community, that community over there. Blah, blah, blah. So Kickstarter is a really nice place to be able to concentrate all those people, where there's not a huge expectation of having a game right now. Unlike, say, like a early access on Steam or something, which is also great for building community, but there needs to be a game. It needs to be regularly updated. Steam is already going to be taking account like your sales during early access to, you know, feed its algorithm to determine who it's going to show you to, both during early access and once you launch. So there's a lot more writing on for just like, we have a game idea, here's the prototype, what do you guys think? And that's really nice. In terms of you know, other methods of fundings like publishing agreements or things like that, we did, you know, seek out a publisher for this. It seems like it may not be the right way to go for it. One thing to keep in mind with, as you said, with a publisher agreement, it's not just that you have, specific deadlines and, requirements and all that for the game, and that they have some amount of, creative input. The big thing that a publisher agreement can do to like kind of kill an indie studio is recoup. So you're correct that funding, part of a publisher agreement is that the publisher will give a certain amount of funds for development for the game up front. But what's missing from that equation is that once the game goes on sale, in many of these instances, anywhere from 70 to 100% of all of the revenue that comes in from the game goes to the publisher until they're paid back for all of the dev funding that they have advanced you, essentially. And then it becomes a rev share, and the terms of that rev share change depending on the publisher. That can typically mean that a indie studio isn't getting paid literally anything for the first several months.
Wow.
At least for the first month that the game is out. So for kind of more established, what I call triple I's, you mentioned, Pillars, Obsidian, I consider very much a triple I, right? Yeah. They've got dozens of employees and they still work with publishers and all that stuff, but that's fine. That's like kind of baked into the publisher agreement for them, and they know that recoup is coming. But for people at my level, that 1 month can be fatal, right? 1 month of getting paid. There are some great, more low-level indie publishers that are focused on not having a recoup, but it's pretty rare still in this industry. I really applaud the ones that are not doing like 100% recoup at launch, because it can pretty much be a death sentence for a studio. Even if they put out like a okay game, their check isn't going to be cut, like even start to be cut until like second or third month. Yeah.
Wow. So like, when you think about titles that, like, let's say theoretically, you're looking at a title that just exploded, right? Like when we talk about something like, let's say maybe, Hollow Knight or Undertale or Cuphead, that just overnight, they just boom, like they took off. Mm-hmm. So like it becomes a lot easier for an independent an independent dev to try and, would you say that they would focus or look at the focus of traction before they consider whether or not maybe they should jump on the bandwagon of an independent, like a publisher, like let's say Microsoft or something, and say, hey, you know what? We have a lot of people who are vastly excited about this game. We were indie, but now with the amount of following that we have, is it something that we just ought to do so we can reach more people, that we can get a wider audience? Like we already know that we've got the traction. Now we just need the, that little extra motivation to really drive it home.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a huge role for indie publishers, and I don't want my comment of like there is recoup and that can be a problem to be like, oh, I hate publishers, right? Far from it. Yeah. I think what as you put it, is traction. I think that's really an important thing to look at when dealing with publishers, in part because publishers don't create a successful or unsuccessful game. Publishers act as a megaphone. Publishers only really can amplify success that you are already having. They can take a game that seems like it's going to be doing pretty well and turn it into phenomenally well. But if the game is doing like or is on track to do then a publisher can't help with that at all. They're not really equipped to do the groundwork, to build that kernel of the community, of getting those evangelists, and really setting the game up for success. They're instead able to capitalize on that and show it and expose it to newer audiences, make it become like a gamer household name and things like that. Yeah.
Right. So the steps that you've mentioned in terms of like, all the different roles and you finding individual contractors in order to fill a spot for art, fill a spot for music, or whatever it may be. How have you sought outreach or like tried to find people? Have you tried to find people within the community who are already interested in your title? Have you gone to, I know you mentioned previously that you've got some friends that are in the industry, but like, Have you ever sought outside or gone to any like schools or gone to any conventions and said, we're looking for X, we're looking for Y? Is that something, someone's interested in? What does that process look like for you guys in trying to bring people on to accomplish a goal? Do you look in like a specific category or?
Yeah, it kind of, I think as follows from how I was kind of framing the subject earlier. It's a situation where we finally sit down and say, okay, we need a person who's going to do exactly this, right? And they need to have the following skill sets. Sometimes that can be harder to find. Sometimes it's easier. But typically it's not a time where I'm like, okay, I really just need somebody who has like a Foley studio to do sound effects. I'm like, I need somebody who has a Foley studio to do sound effects and can also write, both rock and EDM, which is like the soundtrack for our current game, and has comfortable, is familiar with Wise, which is one of the main audio middleware plugins for Unity, and because I need that to all be one person.
Right.
And so sometimes they can show up. I've had people really just fall in my lap in some situations, completely metaphorically.
Yeah, but, I get it. Yeah.
This idea of like, people. I will tell you at conventions, I am regularly approached with by especially voice actors and sound designers. I would say at every single PAX I go to, or even like smaller local conventions, I come away with probably a dozen to 2 dozen in each of those buckets of people who are looking for jobs. And I will typically, if I need somebody right now, then I will go home and I will listen to all their, I'm assuming that there's going to be a portfolio on their card, and I'll go and listen to all of them. And if not, I keep a stash of, specifically categorized by job, so that if I need somebody in that field, then I can go back and take a look at things. In terms of me, like, going out and looking for other people, I tend to check a few different places. I tend to check Twitter and Reddit on game dev classifieds. Because especially artists will post their portfolios or at least some amount of work in both places, and that's particularly helpful for me to make sure that I can get a sense as to what they're doing. And I'll just directly reach out to them and try to get a sense of rates and their process. And then lastly, you asked if I go to schools or things like that. I have. I generally in the past few years have done internships with current college students. I myself also teach a game design course. I'm an adjunct faculty with CUNY, so I teach both intro to game design and then digital games. And have sometimes like pulled students that I have where schools are able to offer credit or have internship requirements. There's actually a game design program here at Bloomfield, which is just across the river in New Jersey, and they are required to have an internship at a studio before graduating, some kind of media thing. And so the game design people tend to seek out other game studios. So in those situations, it tends to be a little bit more handholdy, obviously. I will say I have a tendency not to seek out new graduates because I don't have the budget for it, right? If I'm going to be paying somebody to do something, I actually need them to be fairly experienced, because it means that I've already decided I don't have the time for this. I can't manually do it myself. I need it to pass on to somebody else.
Right.
That being said, that's not necessarily traditional. I'm doing a lot of work right now with a studio based in Austin, Texas, called Hidden Achievement, and they're 2 AAA vets that run it. And they bring on a lot of new graduates, basically to cut their teeth on projects for their indie studio before recommending them to larger projects. And they've had great success with that model. So I don't want to say that my model is the only way of doing things or anything like that. But that tends to be my general process. Is some people will show up and just they hit me at the right time. Some people I will recognize that I need to go out and hunt them down, and then I try to take at least obviously with COVID that this is all stopped, but I normally try to take at least one, sometimes up to 4 students over the summer semester. Yeah.
Nice. So you have a pretty strong outreach then in one, not only I would say bringing people in or giving them the experience through internship or intern work that may or may not be involved with, Razbury. Obviously Razbury, I assume, has been around a fairly long time. How long have you been teaching?
So I've only been teaching for about 2 years. That sounds right. 2 years. I started working on the first game for Razbury Games in 2013.
Is that Vidar?
So 7 years.
Or Vidar?
Yeah. Vidar, yeah.
Okay.
And that was released in 2017 because I was just kind of doing it as a hobby project until I really pulled the trigger on it. Yep. In the interim, I've kind of done other smaller projects. I mentioned this other studio, Hidden Achievement. I produce for them, so I'm a producer for this other studio. There's yet another studio in New York City that I'm also a producer for, and I tend to jump into that role for other people who need project management, specifically with a focus on trying to get onto consoles. Because that's a whole nother can of worms trying to release indie games on consoles.
Yeah, I know, and we've discussed it before. A lot of people don't know, and I don't know what the rates are anymore, but a lot of people don't know that anytime that you want to do a release on a console like PlayStation or Xbox, or if you want to do updates to a game, then typically there's almost like a service fee for doing so.
Yeah, hey, the costs definitely start to add up, right? I mean, you have your application costs and your fees. You have the fee for the dev kit. You have to buy a dev kit, from everyone from each of these. One of my personal favorites that adds up a lot is the rating agencies. So traditionally, in order to release on console, like ESRB in the United States or similar, you need an ESRB rating. There is a international association of ratings that doesn't charge a fee, but only some storefronts and only some countries take them. So you can find yourself spending, $5,000 to $10,000 if you're going to do a fairly localized launch on these consoles, just on getting, your T for Teen label from all these different countries, or their equivalent. So that starts to add up a lot, and all of these fees, definitely start to increase when you're trying to do a console launch. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Well, and so like, I guess that brings about the question that, like, when you're sitting here working as an independent developer, you're talking about the fact that you're bringing on contracted individuals. Hey, I need you to do art. I need you to do music. I need you to dev and do coding along with me. And here's what I've got, from A, B, C, they all add up. But you've got crowdfunding in place. But how often do you find, like, I've been an entrepreneur, a businessman before. I ran a car business for a long time, and a lot of times you find you're dipping into your own wallet. Like you just have to, in order to pay the bills.
It happens a lot. I think actually so we haven't done crowdfunding yet from Rust. But we were very lucky that we won maybe 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years ago. New York State ran a game dev challenge, basically for games that were being made in New York State. And we won the grand prize for that, which came with a pretty hefty sum. And I mean hefty for our budget, which is to say, I think we ran out of it once we got to PAX this year, like PAX East, right before the shutdown. So we're back to dipping into our own wallet, but it lasted us like a good 2 years,
Which is excellent, really, realistically.
Yeah. So that was nice. There are other opportunities like that to try to scrounge up, bits and pieces here. And then also the work that I do for other studios as a producer is contract work that I can then take and put back into my studio. I think that's actually pretty traditional for a lot of indies. It's very rare that people are just sitting down doing this full time without contracting out to do any other work. And we tend to intermix a lot, at least in the New York scene. I think that might be different depending on where you're at. But certainly, you know, I'll do work for another studio, and some of those people might have specialty where like they might do work for me later on. And everybody inevitably starts to pick up a contract here or there for bigger studios or for things that aren't quite games related, to make sure that we're paying the bills. It's rare that people are at kind of this, you know, 1 to 20 person level, doing this full time without any other source of money coming into the studio.
Right. So like, we obviously we've heard a little bit about, you know, the back end side of things, what it takes to, you know, create, what it takes to dev, what it takes to run the studio. So like more on the front side, the customer facing side, what do you feel like goes into the process of, you know, creating not only an engaging story, but like really drawing in an audience enough to, one, set yourself apart from other games that exist out there in the industry, but two, to do exactly that, to tell a story, to give an experience to a user, to really help them to feel.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think kind of breaking that down into a few different places, because some people I think aren't necessarily like, there are a lot of players who aren't looking for a story that's going to like or a narrative experience with any game. I tend to like them. I know a lot of players do, but they're not, I don't think, strictly necessary to make sure that you're standing apart. In terms of creating a experience that's going to stand apart from, I mean, the millions of games that are out there, like it feels like there's like 100 now released every day on Steam. It's crazy. In terms of trying to make sure that you're standing out in that regard, I think the number one thing that indie devs have to have is that they believe in it, that they have to believe in the project themselves. It can't be like I'm making this because this genre is cool or popular right now. It can't be you know, I'm going to try to like see if I can get a game to market within 18 months and that's it. People play our tier of indie games because they are passion projects, right? And you can, in the best of these games, you can feel the love that is put into that project. So unlike, you know, a larger game, unlike games that are even at that AAA level, everyone on the team has to be a true believer of the project. And that's kind of a necessary step to making sure that the game is actually going to stand out. It may not be sufficient, it probably isn't sufficient, but it's at least necessary. And that comes across when you're dealing with your customers, when you're dealing with your community. If you're not particularly invested, then you're not going to be particularly invested in your community. You might even have somebody who's like, you know, super engaged with the game, and you want to be able to share that with them, as opposed to just kind of like, you know, be distant or not be able to talk about your own game in a compelling way. I think it definitely comes across at conventions. So I do especially like before this, I was doing a crazy convention circuit. You know, certainly all the PAXs, but also a lot of local stuff. DreamHack was, you know, getting ready for GTC before everything shut down, and so I think that one of the more successful things can just be talking to somebody individually, and because we are humans and we can relate to each other and just like get a sense of what your interests are from your body language and all this kind of stuff, it comes across as very transparent when somebody is just kind of there as a marketing person and doesn't really know what's going on with the game. Doesn't get excited when they're asked a question about it. So to me, that's kind of the necessary component. In terms of the actually trying to, you know, make a game that's going to stand out from it, this is actually something I've struggled with as well. And for me, it's always been more from the mechanics standpoint, or from the actual game content standpoint. It has been more about doing something that hasn't been done as opposed to executing well. I am a self-taught programmer, right? I started learning Unity 3 years ago, and I'm like trying to do, a permanently online live services multiplayer game, which any programmer would tell you, like, what the hell is wrong with you?
Right.
But we're tackling, rather than, there's a lot of card roguelike-y kind of card games that have come out since Slay the Spire, right? Slay the Spire, let's be real. Slay the Spire is an amazing, brilliant game. Slay the Spire is not the prettiest game in the world.
No.
It's not the prettiest game in the world. I love Slay the Spire. I have invested too many hours in Slay the Spire. But where their success was that it was new and fun and hit that sweet spot. There's also a fair amount of timing and all that stuff in there. You've seen a lot of other games come out that are Slay the Spire like, so much so that it's like Slay the Spire like can kind of be a genre, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Some with multiple lanes, some with different kinds of cards, some with and they're executed better in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But we don't look at them as the hallmark for the genre. So instead, what we look at is the thing that reinvented the genre, or invented it from the first place. And I think that at our level, that's something we can do, right? Slay the Spire was a as scrappy team. I think two main people with a handful of other contractors and support, right? And that's the kind of stuff that we're really good at, is coming up with wild ideas that AAA can't invest, the millions of dollars that they need to, because it's a risk, and trying to put that out there and see if it sticks. Doesn't always work, but I think the game description has to be something fundamentally different than what is out there, rather than just like, it's Slay the Spire, but twice.
Right.
Or whatever. Like it has to be more. So from us, we've really, everything has been so incredibly focused on co-op. What if I want to play Hearthstone but with my friends instead of against them? What does that look like? What is it? And completely from the ground up have developed it as a cooperative collectible card game. Anytime somebody asks, like, oh man, I would love PvP in this, I'm like, that's a different game. Yeah. It's a completely different game. We would have to start over. And so that's where we are able to find our success. It might not be the prettiest, it might not be executed the best, but it's really new, and I think that challenges the kinds of gamers that play indie games that we want.
Well, and I think, which kind of actually like two branching questions. I'll get to them, but like the first one I would say is, we see these resets through time, and a lot of times the indie development teams are the ones that push the boundaries, push the limitations, the expectations that the industry has, gamers have, about what makes a great game. And we tend to go through these generational gaps in gaming where, like everyone's caught up in just Call of Duty, caught up in just Battlefield, caught up in just, whatever. And you see these dry spells. And so I bring it up a lot on stream that like the last two that we've really seen a reinvention of the industry, a reinvention of time, was pretty much 2013 and more importantly 2008. So you saw BioShock come out of the woodwork, you saw Braid come out of the woodwork, Fez, and all these games that not only like tugged on your heartstrings as a person, but really told a story, really had a great experience, and really defined the industry in great games. And so I think that we're coming up on another one of those resets, and we've talked about it a lot, that these smaller studios, and sometimes even like maybe like a larger studio, like obviously Cyberpunk's on the radar, and I think that stands to do a lot of different things for the industry that we don't normally see. And Witcher's always kind of been on that bandwagon, but I think that there are a lot of these developers, the independent developers, that really, they just stand out. And so like, do you feel like you're in a position, or do you feel like the industry is in a position to starting to come back to that? Do you feel like there are any challenges in the way?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that what I'm really excited for is that there's now more AAA that is borrowing from indie. Right.
Yeah.
And we're starting to now see this, like the phase that we had before of indie going into like a lot of the lessons that we have learned or explored, or some of these ideas are now moving into bigger studios with higher budgets. Maybe not AAA, but like bigger studios with higher budgets. So I look at Death Stranding, for example, as the perfect example of this, as being like, what does a walking simulator look like with a shit ton of money?
Right. Right.
And that's really cool and interesting to see a genre that was absolutely invented by the little indies, kind of grow up in that way.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of focus on you had said a handful of developers like really standing out. I actually think it's for the best is going to the wayside. You're absolutely right. Like the to see like 2008 like Furfez and Braid come out was really the start of what a lot of people look at as like this indie renaissance. But we don't want to put such emphasis on those two developers. And so instead, what we want is to really put an emphasis on great games. And I think that's where we're at, actually. I think we're in a much better place where it's not the like... indies are not as much right now like the Civilization games that always have like Sid Meier's name attached to it, or the equivalent. It is instead about the quality of the game and not about the like pedigree of the person. The caveat that I will add to that is on crowdfunding, which we were talking about earlier. Crowdfunding has gone the way of a focus on individual developers, where basically the successful ones are either sequels to already popular games, or from the creator who brought you your favorite game on Super Nintendo back when you were a kid. And there's a concern about that, because when we've seen the latter, sometimes they're not able to execute. Sometimes it turns out that they were really good at being a creative director at a larger company, but not necessarily able to do everything else that is involved with being a much smaller team. It's their skill set may lie in more of just the design, the thinking process, and not necessarily the execution on that one. And so some people have kind of been frustrated by some of those Kickstarters. So it'll be interesting to see. I think, going forward, this certainly, the indie the quote unquote indie apocalypse has come and gone. The heyday of everyone can just like get a game out and sell it is far from over, or is over, and has been for a long time. And so people are having to really scramble to try to understand what they're supposed to be doing in this space. If you're interested in terms of like numbers and sales figures and all that stuff, Mike Rose from No More Robots does a talk on this every year at GDC, and I think he just put out his slides this year because there was no GDC. How many units sold and all that kind of stuff every year. It's pretty depressing. It goes down year over year. And it seems to be that we are at a juncture where your game actually does really need to be up to snuff before it gets any attention.
Well, yeah. And I think I think that's always been definitely the focus. I just all I was getting by the 2008 thing is like everything was always big industry. There was always a publisher attached to it. Indie dev was new. Steam was just starting to take off. You just didn't really see any of that, and then all of a sudden it opened the whole world up to possibilities. And so
absolutely.
I definitely think that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and it comes with both the business side in terms of distribution, from Steam, now even Switch, like Nintendo realizing that they need to, offer space for indies. It felt like, hell had frozen over. Right. Because that was never something that Nintendo was going to do. Right. But the business platforms and opportunities, but then also the tool sets as well, right? The development of both Unity and Unreal as tools that are not overly complicated to use and are now free for most most indie studios unless they're making a ton of money. And other additional tool sets have also made the development of these games a little bit more manageable for smaller teams and not AAA. So both at the same time, really.
Yeah, I think it was a beautiful catalyst. I think it was something that the industry in general needed to, in a brutish way of saying it, wake up. That we need to see the light of what actually makes a good game, that you can't just regurgitate content and really get anything. And I think that there's ironically, we've talked about it as well, just like on and off on stream, that there's a correlation there with, creators in general, from artistic design to music to video games, that you can't just churn out whatever just because it's got a catchy beat or a fancy look or, enacting characters or, whatever. You actually have to have solid mechanics. You can't have crashing games. You can't, it's just one thing after another that really build upon the foundation of what game design at a core truly is. From that whole experience, I think that I'm excited for the future, and I continue to be excited for the future, because I think the whole world, from the streaming aspect and being able to hear, people's live responses on, hey, this is what isn't working or what is working, and seeing the amount of YouTube content creators who are making, like review videos and things like that, like our eyes have just been completely opened. And I still feel for the indie devs, because I feel like, as Antoine had said in chat, like you can feel their passion in it, and when someone's passionate and confident and they need it, it just shines right through that story. It shines through the game, and they work so much harder to build upon it. So I think it puts us in a position to succeed in the future.
The only thing that I want to caveat is to say, like, there's still unfortunately a necessary space for the games that don't live up to that, like, idealized standard.
Oh, absolutely. You need contrast.
So you need contrast. You also you need to pay the bills. So, like, not every project can be an indie project, right? Or a passion project. There was a different game that I've been working on, where the artist, is doing great work on it. His main source of income on games, especially before the current one, was on art for slot games, which is a totally valid thing that exists in this space. There's a lot of I have a dear friend here in New York City who just got a contract, actually, to make a really cool mobile game, but based on an HBO series. But there are a lot of those kinds of, IP tie-in, or, make the game based on whatever, for a quick, like, match 3, or, based on this IP that you're getting paid for. Those have a really important place in that they allow us to make these passion projects. Right. So I'm always reluctant to be like, you can see that this game is terrible, when I'm just like, they got paid for this. You know that they got paid for this, and that's really important, because it allows them to make their really good game.
Well, and like we were kind of talking about before, like it's a investment opportunity. Like, I can do X and, get what I need to do what I want. And so I think the same thing can be said about a lot of people. Like, the whole concept's always been tried and true about, or I should say reoccurring, not tried and true, but reoccurring, that you always hear about the whole sellout concept. And it's like, yeah, but maybe that was the smart play. Like, maybe that was a smart play for their business, so that they could build on their brand, build on what they actually want to build on. And they needed to seed money. They needed to, work a business contract. They needed to work a deal. And sometimes you have to sacrifice some categories, especially when you're thinking about it as a business, to grow another part of your business that's more important, that will build in the future. And so,
and there's a way to, I think, to do both. I think, the friend that I mentioned, she has, I think the game's been announced, so I'm not, like, breaking any, like, friend DAs or anything, but she has a studio here called Glow Up Games, and they're doing, their focus is on games made by particularly, like, women of color, and so they're doing a game that is using the IP and the rights from Insecure on HBO, which is awesome, and the game is looking fantastic. And so there's a way to do both, right? I'm not saying that it's like, oh, well, we have to, like, sell out in order to pay the bills. I think it's just important to recognize that there is a place for games that are not all Stardew Valley, right? Of one guy in his basement for 4 to 5 years, just cranking out everything on that game because that was his baby. There's space within the industry for games that are not just that.
Yeah. No, and I think they fill that void, I definitely would agree. I mean, and like I said too, I think it adds stark contrast that you can see, like, there are necessary projects that are very evidently necessary projects. Well, sorry, maybe not evident. Some people, again, out of experience might not be as aware to it. And obviously I appreciate your insight. But I always think that there's more to the picture than a lot of people necessarily see. And sometimes it's nice to think about that like, okay, well, maybe the reason that they're running into a problem, maybe the reason that they're doing this, or maybe the reason they're doing that is bigger than we know. Like, the publisher's doing this, or they personally are finding a challenge related to health, or, whatever. Like, let's just open up our eyes to think about the possibilities. And so I think it's great to see, personally, like the Kickstarter stories that you end up finding, like, hey, like, this is the step that we're at. This is our stretch goal. This is like, I know that we can fulfill this need and then further the project in this direction. I know that this is our struggle point right now, and I just wanted to update everyone. Like, the level of transparency that we're starting to see in the industry is phenomenal. And I think one of the other challenges. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I think it's important, and I think a lot of it comes down to having a good community manager for that, or somebody who can act as your voice, or just being willing to be upfront. And I think that there has been kind of this like weird dance with games marketing, because the marketing department is like, I want to keep everything back, I want things to be a secret, and more of a community manager's position is going to be like, I want to be able to tell people that this is like what's happening. My personal feeling on that is, I am too unknown to keep anything a secret.
Right.
I find a lot of people who are doing kind of the indie level development who are like, well, we don't want to like reveal this, we don't want to reveal that, because we want to make sure that that's something that's going, like, we don't want to tip our hand about an idea for the game before it's like fully implemented, vetted, QA'd, all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, why? I got my community like right in Discord. They could just tell me if this is a good idea or a bad idea.
Right.
And I think that whenever you're keeping something secret, you're not making noise, and the only way to get noticed at this point is to make noise. So those kind, like, having no transparency or being cagey with what's going on at our level does not help. It's different for the bigger guys, but at our level absolutely is unhelpful. And so I have a tendency to just kind of say whatever is happening to my core community members. And I've seen it used even to decent effect. One of the to decent effect at higher levels. Game that I'm like on repeat obsessed with is Path of Exile, and they have an absolutely phenomenal community manager who like pops in and actually just talks to people like they're humans, and it's like, yeah, here's what's going on, here's why we made this thing that you disagree with the way that it is.
Right.
And most people are like, oh, I get it. Yeah, okay, cool. You always have like the one person who still says, why don't you just make this single player game multiplayer? And it's like, because that's 4 times as much work.
Right.
Just saying the word multiplayer doubled our budget.
Yep.
But by and large, community managers like who are good can go in and pretty quickly diffuse that situation. And that transparency helps not just us get noticed, but it also helps people who are part of the community feel more like part of the community. And when people feel like they're more like part of the community, they're empowered to then tell their friends about it. And that's, going back to the beginning, that's where we try to find all of our success, is making sure people want to tell their friends about the game now.
Well, and so something else that you brought up, like, you know, in being having a good community manager, obviously you brought up that you're wearing multiple hats in this role, in this spot for the company. And so, like, I know that one of the challenges, especially when you're talking about funding from community to everything, like, it's your responsibility to not only take ownership, but to sell the solution. So, like, how do you feel like you've grown as a developer, as an individual, to put your face in front of not only companies or contracted work or the community? Like, how have you started to be able to, you know, sell Razbury, to sell the game from Rust, to sell everything, like yourself, your opinions, your passion in the game?
So first I want to shout out Iman220, who's in chat, because he has been he came to us just, you know, as somebody who's playing from Rust, and has joined us as a really fantastic and invaluable community manager for it, because I cannot be on all the time, right? I found being responsive to people a little bit stressful in that regard. I think part of it, in terms of my growth during this, happened much earlier for me. I have kind of, especially, I mean, I am, you know, a very out and proud member of the LGBT community. I have been for decades at this point. And I think for me, there was like a fundamental shift in just my life in general, where once I came out, I was like, my life is an open book, and I'm somebody who most people would describe as an oversharer. And so the transparency issue was never really an issue for me. But in terms of the actual presentation and selling of Razbury Games, it definitely was much more of a shift for me. I, for at least 2 years after I stopped practicing law, would readily introduce myself as a game developer, but I used to be a lawyer. And that was my, like, go-to, because I needed people to understand that I had, like, somehow achieved my adulthood, or was, you know, had been doing something more important that society values, as opposed to games. I got called out by a lot of games friends who were like, we're just, like, hanging out at a bar. Like, you don't need to, like, caveat that or whatever. You don't need to, like, throw me, who has been, you know, working games my entire life, under the bus. So yeah, so it took me a while to be able to go to certainly publish. I think it's still something that is part of my life. It's still something that I use when I introduce myself on things that are about me and my experience. But now when I go to publishers, I do have a little bit more of that confidence to be able to say, no, I just do games. Like, this is my game. This is now my second game. I think going through the process, having, like, if there are people who are listening to this that are like, I kind of wanted to get into games, the most important thing that you can do is release a game, and send that off into the world. Like, having a game on Steam costs you $100. It's not even so much about making a game, like, the best game. It's not making the game that you want to make right now. It's not about making a game that's going to be wildly successful. It's about literally having a game that exists on Steam and somebody is capable of buying it. That, I think, is at that point is when you start to gain that, like, okay, I can do this again, but better. And until you have that feeling, you're going to be feeling like a beginner the entire time, because you haven't gone through it once. So now, having done it a few times, I'm like, okay, I can do that but better. I can still do that but better, and it eliminates that beginner-ish feeling. But that's the only way to grow, is to actually have done it once, to have beaten the first level, essentially, right? And you can't say that you have done that until somebody has given you money for your game. Even if it's one person, somebody has to have given you money in exchange for your game.
Right. I mean, like, yeah. I think it's good. I think it's good to have, you know, definitely a level of humility. And I definitely think that the way the industry's headed, I think that they're becoming a lot less of and I've talked about it, like, you know, oh, the closet gamer, the closet dev, like, the industry in general is much more mainstream, that it's now it can show up at a dinner table in a conversation like, oh, Ninja's doing this, or oh, this company's developing that game, or whatever.
Right.
5 years ago, it was like, oh, you make video games? Oh,
Yeah.
oh. But I've never had a problem with it. I mean, I've been I would say definitely loud about the fact that like I play games and I will continue to play games because of what they've done for people, because of the stories that they've told. But I think it's beautiful that like you still have something back in your pocket, and I think it's from those previous experiences that we learn. But the great thing is like, you don't have to talk about it until like someone breaks out the paperwork and you're like, oh, excuse me, I was a lawyer. Let me take a look at this here,
right?
And they're like, oh,
it does crop up. That's actually typically what I regret telling people about that, because they're like, oh, you are? Can you look over this contract between me and my artist? I'm like, no.
No, I just do games now. I haven't seen any paperwork updates for years. I'm so sorry.
Don't know anything about that. What are these words? No, it's our prior lives and our skill sets, obviously shape how we approach things, and I think also change my perspective on design in general, right? I tend to be very systems focused, like to a fault, with my games, and that comes a lot from kind of the same logical parts of the legalese stuff, but it's not necessarily something that demonstrates that somebody belongs in this industry when they're coming to you and saying, well, I've only really been doing this for like a year, but let me tell you about all this other stuff that I was doing before. It just comes from a imposter syndrome place and a general lack of experience. So I think it's important. The nice thing about games is that anyone can just do it. There's no like I had to go to law school and pass a bar exam, right? There was some kind of gating mechanism. With games, it's like, you want to make games, make games. Just start making games, and that's also, as it turns out, the fastest way to make games. And then you can go to a convention and you can be like, here is my game. I make games. I'm in this industry,
right?
And there's a lot of growth from that, especially when you realize that everyone else is in the same boat as well.
So then I guess as a major question, if you had to offer insight to like anyone who might be out there who's listening, they're thinking about it, they've always been on the cusp, they've always been on the edge, like how can I make a game? I've got an idea, and I want to do it. What piece of advice would you offer to say like, this is an absolute necessity, fire on this and execute? Yeah.
Do a game jam. I would specifically recommend Ludum Dare. I think that's in part because it's short. That's my biggest advice to anyone who is like, I don't actually have any of this experience, I don't have any ideas or anything, or like I have an idea for a game but I don't have like nowhere to start or whatever. For those who are not aware, game jams are basically condensed time frames to make games under specific constraints. Ludum Dare happens, I think, 3 times a year, maybe 4 times a year, and it's over a weekend. So you get a theme on Friday night, and you have to submit your game by Sunday night, and that's it. And this sounds like a lot, but actually, as a result of it being a lot, it's not, because it has to be done by Sunday night, no matter what. And try just to make literally any kind of submission. There are like some prizes are in it or whatever, but it's just like medals. It's not like there's a cash prize. It's not like your game is going to be good or bad or anything like that. They're all kind of crappy because they were made in a weekend, right? That's the point. That's the beauty of it. And that way, like I was saying earlier, one of like the most important process, the most important point of making a game is releasing it by far. Having gone through that process of uploading it on Sunday night is by far the most important process, and it will get you that a lot of the same feelings of having done it, having released a game. So to me, that's the most important thing. If you can't find, if it's like too far from a Ludum Dare, or like you don't have that weekend free, itch.io has like a calendar of game jams for literally every weekend, or for months long, or for week long ones, or for whatever. So find one that's going to work with your schedule. Sit down and just make a damn game. And having that requirement that it be done is going to make sure that it doesn't spiral out of control, that it doesn't turn into like your first game is a 6-year project that you don't really know how to finish. And you just kind of keep coming back to it with ideas or things like that. That's the biggest danger of somebody who just wants to tackle their big game idea first, right? I spent a lot of times before I started even making Vidar. I made like tiny other little things. I made custom like StarCraft 2 maps. And I did like a lot of those other kinds of things to kind of just have that process of producing. You have to do something like that first before saying, I have this great idea for a game. I'm going to sit down and just start writing that. So don't tackle your big idea first, and specifically do a game jam. That would be my recommendation for people who want to get started. Yeah.
Nice. So, obviously, getting back to the game, the gem of it all, from Rust. Now, you said you're doing an alpha release or reopening your alpha servers today. I know I've personally experienced from Rust, and I've enjoyed it. And while it doesn't come without its challenges, like, obviously you might run into an error, you might run into some math issues, whatever might occur, like, it can happen, but like, you can still enjoy the game. So I know that we had discussed it before. Where would people go if they wanted to involve themselves in the title, and what does that schedule look like in the future for being able to play that title?
Yeah, so we are still kind of in a early alpha stage, as we're calling it. We are trying to ramp back up. We were right before the shutdown. We were ramping up to an alpha every other weekend. So every other weekend, we would have the servers on from Friday through Sunday, and people would be able to play online and all that kind of stuff with us. And that gave and then redeploy, maybe add a new feature here or there. It's necessary right now because once you start doing like full 24-hour live services, fixing a live server is just a lot more complicated. So it's a lot nicer to just be like, sorry about that, guys. We're going to go back and we'll see you in 2 weeks. So we are hoping to get back on that schedule. So today we'll launch an alpha, and then we're actually going to be live for the entire week of July 6th as well, which will be really nice. If anyone wants to join us, we're considering this fairly open. Anyone can hop into our Discord. Actually, if Elliot's still here, he might even be able to throw a link into the chat.
Links are definitely enabled, so if you want to throw one out, feel free.
And we can, once you get into our Discord, just ping any of us and we'll get you a key. We're kind of like hidden on Steam right now, so you can just use a Steam key and get online.
And that starts at 5. Is that accurate? Eastern?
Like 5 or 6. I don't know. We'll see how. I've got like a few more things on my checklist, so we'll see how long that goes, and then we'll try to launch it. And then it'll probably be until Sunday. I tend to take it down around like 11 p.m. Eastern or so on Sunday nights. And where this time actually it's really nice because we've added an entirely new like tutorial and new player experience for it. So the entire beginning and intro to the game is completely different and teaches you a lot more about the mechanics and stuff that we have always had, but we're never clear, and somebody just in our Discord had to tell you like, oh, by the way, you can click this button and it'll do all these cool things. So we've finally tutorializing all that, and I think we'll be in good shape for a fun alpha.
Awesome. I'm excited for it. Definitely excited for it. Which, like stated, E-Man, if you would like to, please feel free, throw up a link for an invite. If you guys want more people to, just enjoy it, try it out, I would definitely recommend it. I've had fun and continue to have fun in playing it thus far in my experience. But at this time, I would love to have anyone who has any questions for the development studio, for Dean, for any purpose. Feel free. We'd love to hear from you guys out there in the audience. If you have anything to field, give it a shot. Throw it out there. We'll see what we can do.
Yeah. So we'll be live for this weekend, and then of course, like once people join the alpha, then they're in it for the rest of the time. Our plan is to generally we're toying with some different ideas for our models right now. Our plan is to keep the alpha is completely open and free until the end of a Kickstarter. Our plan was initially to do a Kickstarter. Like I said, I do a lot of these conventions, and our plan was to do it after PAX West because we tend to do very well at conventions. Obviously, PAX West is not happening, so we may be kicking the Kickstarter down the road to as late as after PAX East next year. But our plan is to keep it free to people until the end of any kind of Kickstarter campaign, at which point they would we would close it to anyone who wasn't a backer. So that's kind of our strategy right now. I have no idea if that's still going to be the case in like a week, let alone a year, but we'll see.
I know the feeling. Everything's up in the air pretty much at this point, especially around game industry in general. Because like, I mean, the nice thing is like being an electronic world. The largest part is like, yeah, you have to sit there and compile for hours upon hours, but being able to upload that content, I think that the electronic world has offered us more capabilities to be able to have a dev team that's around the world, around wherever they are, and be able to just work together on a project, code together on a project, whereas that used to just not be the case. And so like we still see a lot of these companies saying no, we're back a little bit, but we're still on pace as it is. A little slow, but on pace. So Antoine, go ahead.
So how many games have you been able to work on? So my two principal projects, Vidar came out 2017, something like that, and From Rust are like the big beefy projects. I am also a producer for a game that is being made in Austin called Outpost Delta, which is a fun Metroidvania that we're hoping to launch by the end of this year. I'm into it. It's like a lot of good like gravity control throughout. So it's kind of been a fun toy to play with from both a production and a design perspective. And that should be coming out on consoles and Steam at the end of sometime this fall, I think. And then I have also done a fair amount of what I would call like bigger game jams. I am associated with an organization here in New York called Playcrafting, which acts as like one of the hubs for a lot of the game industry here. And we've started doing some really cool work where we partner with brands and other like tech companies and things like that to bring in specific more like people who are actually in the industry to do a game jam for that company. With certain parameters. So for example, like the one with Verizon was like all of these like industry vets from New York came in to make games specifically utilizing 5G. I had done one with Schick, the Razer company, because they were sponsoring an award at the Game Awards, and they just wanted to have games that were made on their theme, protect and defend. So it was really fun because I got to work with other people who I know, who I see at conventions all the time, who I'm like, basically neighbors with, but we don't work together because like we all have our own studios. And so we all got to kind of come together and work on that. I also made a game this past year for a convention here in New York called Play NYC. Play NYC does something called graffiti games every year, where they feature about 5 or 6 different developers on a particular issue to make, and they're sponsored to make a game just that exists for that convention. So I think the first year it was just like New York people, but the second year it was specifically focused on first generation immigrants who are or maybe like just actually, I think it was like the immigrant community here in New York. Last year, the graffiti games, which I participated in, was to celebrate World Pride for LGBT developers. And then this year, I think it's specifically focused on Black developers. And it's a nice way to like fund specific communities to make games about their experiences. So I got to make something for that as well. I've worked on I've helped to try to do a little bit of console production for a clicker game here it's called Selva Singularity, which is a free download on phones and Steam right now. So I don't know, maybe about a half a dozen or so games. That sounds about right. That's a long answer to your question, Antoine. But two, I would say, principal games, two other kind of mid-tier games, and then two what I would call like sponsored, glorified game jams. Game jams where I made some money.
I'm just getting these posted.
Awesome. No worries. Cool.
So that's for the alpha, and then obviously for Razbury Games direct link. For whatever reason, it was blocking them. I thought I had it off, but
no worries.
Still with the transition, it's kind of a little weak.
It's gonna be a lot of tech fun with this transition, right?
Yeah. I mean, the downside, one of the things that I've hated the most, honestly, has been. We had Mixplay. I don't know if you were familiar over on the Mixer side of the world, but Mixplay was just this beautiful UI feature that they had where you could design buttons, and then we would have that to where it would essentially just run off of a script. So a user could hit the button, the bot would coordinate with a script that we had coded, and then the script would, run whatever featurette that we've got. So I've got Philips Hue lights.
Nice.
And so a person could click on the screen, and then like I'd be playing, let's say, Outlast, and they know that some guy's about to jump out at me, and boom, strobe hits me right in the face, and I'm freaking out, like jumping all over the place. It was perfect. And I don't have that here, and I'm so sad.
Yeah.
But tech issues. Long story short,
it's gonna be a lot of it. I'm sure that there are like bots that will hook into like the Philips Hue light, but it's finding like it's a lot more complicated, I'm sure, than just. I don't actually know, Antoine. I haven't really been in like the market for it. But who knows? I think it kind of has to hit me at the right time. And also about what it is. I do a fair amount of production, which for those who don't know, production is kind of the like. I don't want to say non-creative side of things, but the
oversight
project. It's like the project management-y kind of stuff. So you do have to still know a lot of what's going on in the game, but you're not necessarily like a designer. In that sense, it's somebody who is more making sure people are meeting their deadlines, making sure. That Joy-Con is capitalized correctly every time we refer to it in a menu, and all those, kinds of silly things. Keeping everybody on track, making sure that somebody isn't blocked because some other team is still trying to do something. And I enjoy it, and it's something that. I enjoy it. It's something that I have the skill set for, but it may or may not be something that I would. Join a AAA team for. I'd have to decide on. It'd have to be a good project. It would have to be a really good project for me to be excited about. Because, like I said, I still want to be excited about the games that I'm working on.
Right. I think that passion's always something, like I said, that really just shines through. And you see a whole dev team just super excited to come together and be like, I just like everything that I did. This is it. I can feel it.
Yeah, I want to be like proud to post the game that I worked on,
right?
On Facebook and be like, hey, friends and family, like, go buy my new game,
right?
And so it would really depend on the project. And I bounce back and forth. I have periods where I play a lot of AAA games, and then I'll go for like 2 or 3 years where I don't play any. So it would need to be something that's like super exciting to me, I guess. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, do we have any other questions at all that we can field, or that anyone has about not only creating games to being a producer, or distribution, or anything at all, or like if he likes like a specific kind of cat or a soft drink, whatever works.
Yeah. And if people have questions that they think of later, they can always find me on Twitter. I'm just at Razbury Games. You have enough spelling of it all over the stream right now, so really, I'm pretty responsive there.
Do we have a Kickstarter link yet?
No, we won't for a while. I like right now it's way more important to me to just like have people in the game playing, and then eventually like once I see enough people playing, I'll be like, okay, yeah, let's do a Kickstarter.
So basically, pay attention to the Twitter, pay attention to the website, and pay attention to the Discord. Boom.
Yep.
Oh, here we go.
God, there's suddenly questions. All right, does the site feature their games? Yes, it should be on RazburyGames.com. You should be able to go to the links to Vidar from Rust. In your experience, what has been the most common language used for programming games? It depends on whether or not you're going to be working in Unity or Unreal or something else. Unity, generally people use C#. Unreal, I believe that it is C++, if I think that's right.
Yep.
Other platforms then will use different things accordingly. My last game was actually made in RPG Maker VX Ace, which used Ruby. I would generally say like if you're like interested in using Unity, C# is the way to go. Yep.
Well, and I think C#'s relatively straightforward. I think it's I wouldn't say maybe it's, in personal opinion, I wouldn't say that it's maybe as powerful as something like C+. But C# it's easy. It's really straightforward and really direct.
You also don't need it to be. Like by the time that you are a programmer who is expert enough to be able to use the power that something like C offers, and that difference matters to you, like where the difference actually is important to you, you will be able to pick up C in no time.
Right.
You're like, if you're just getting started off, that difference is meaningless to you.
Right.
I'm often reminded, I really enjoy skiing right now. That's like a hobby that I picked up later in my life. And I told a friend, I was like already like working. I was like in my mid-20s. I was like, oh, I'm going like for my first ski trip. It's going to be really fun. I'm excited. I'm going to this mountain. Is it any good? And she had been skiing all her life. And I had asked her, I was like, is this mountain like in Maryland any good? And she's like, you won't know the difference. It was terrible, but she was like, it doesn't matter to you. And so I kind of feel like that with C versus like other languages. It's like, I understand that there's a difference, but you won't know the difference.
Nice. Do we... Oh, okay. Sorry, Flanders talking about. Okay, all right. Do we have any other questions before we close down shop on the interview? I just want to make sure we're getting to everyone. Anyone else out there? Last call.
I think we're good. And like I said, if you have any other questions, you could always message me.
Lit. Awesome. Well, hey, I just wanted to say, obviously, greatly appreciate your time. It's always a treasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And hey, hopefully you can get everything done before everything closes down and you can swap over. But I'm looking forward to your alpha.
Awesome. Yeah, I hope to see you in game. It's going to be a fun weekend. We have wiped all of the accounts, so it's going to be starting fresh for a lot of people.
Starting fresh. Always love those, man. It's like Tarkov all over again.
Yes. All right. Thanks so much, man.
No, not a problem. We'll catch you soon.
Take care. Bye.
Awesome. Guys, what the hell? What is that? What is that? What the hell? The hell is that? I don't know what that is. Reopened what? What am I getting reopened on? It is an Easter egg. I've been dev attacked. I apparently got reopened somewhere. I wonder if I like swap it. Will it work? No, what the hell?